I know you are passionate also about macro, and we do spend quite a lot of time on this broadcast on macro. So I did want to make sure that we had a chance to spend some time on your macro framework and what you're observing and kind of the trajectory that you're anticipating over the next little while. So maybe to kind of start us off, where do you think we are in this cycle, right? And how prepared do you think that the sort of kind of asset weighted average market participants are for the environment that we're likely to see over the next 5 to 10 years? So that's a broad enough kind of question to allow you to go in a few different directions.
Yeah, I mean, I like to start at the beginning. I have a broad thesis, right, of where we are in a big macro cycle. And I've been talking about this for a year and a half or 2 years now, very publicly, and things have definitely gone in that direction. But I think that people are starting to listen a bit more. But this almost starts with philosophy at its core, right? I think it's important to start there and have a grounding. It's human nature, animals, natural selection, right? We have free market economics is essentially natural selection. It's the right, it's competitive drive that gets things ultimately to an optimal place. That is the natural state of things, right? And free markets have, generally are dominant and get us, wealthy, get more money, and successful corporations get more money, and eventually, that drives advancement. When you due monetary policy, right, that's essentially you're stoking the flames of free market economics on steroids. It's free money, right? Think of it as, I use this analogy on Twitter, but think of it as the Mesozoic era for dinosaurs and unlimited oxygen, right? It created really big dinosaurs, right? If you give unlimited resources, which is capital, to corporations, you create a technological revolution. You also create immense growth, right? At least maybe not in dollars profit measurement, but definitely in terms of advancement. And that's what we've
Innovation.
seen. Yeah, innovation, exactly. So that's what we've seen. Really, it's accelerated over the last 40 years. So monetary policy became dominant, because if you think about it, the U.S. government was created not to move fast. It was made to not let absolute power corrupt absolutely, to have checks and balances, and to make it difficult to pass laws. And that created a lot of crises over many years that people weren't okay with. And eventually they said, we need to be able to react more quickly. We need somebody to manage this economy a little bit more dynamically. So they created the Federal Reserve, right? And the Federal Reserve it became more and more dominant, and particularly once we moved to fiat, went off the gold standard, and more leverage and more power, right? And so what's happened is the Fed has been the only game in town. They have solved all financial problems as we've gone, been very reactive, and been completely dominant, and particularly in the last 20 some years. As that's happened, right, that's created this benevolent cycle. It's created, again, a natural selection competitive world where money flows to the top and the best ideas win. And ultimately, they get bigger and bigger and they get more and more profit. We've had 1.75% GDP growth in real terms over the last 40 years. Of that, 0.75% of that has gone to the median person. So 1%, think about that, 1%, more than half of the benefits have gone to the top 1%. 1% for the whole economy going to the top 1% means 100% growth for that 1%, compounded every year for 40 years. It's kind of mind-blowing. I mean, if you think about the compounding effect. So just like in nature, it's caused, inequality. All the benefits have gone to the top. And it's also created a technological revolution, as I mentioned. I mean, if you think about it, as a kid, I don't know how old you guys are, I'm 45, but as a kid, I watched the Jetsons and read the book 1984 and then read the book 2000 Space Odyssey. And the future was always science fiction. It never came nearly quick enough. People nowadays, it comes quicker than you could ever possibly imagine. Or cloning and mapping the DNA and going to the moon, going to Mars, and creating all kinds of incredible inventions, and I think people have lost sight. People just think that's the natural, Moore's law. Things are just doubling and doubling and doubling again. They're going to go. That's a function of oxygen. We've been providing so much oxygen, so much resources and money, right, to the system. And anyway, so the point is that could go on forever, and it's benevolent because that's deflationary, right? And that allows the Fed to do more. That you send money to Planet Palo Alto, as I call it. You send money off to this sophisticated planet where they make incredible new goods, all these corporations. And that money doesn't go to individuals for the most part, right? That goes to creating new technologies, Amazons and Ubers and Teslas and all kinds of things that then are sent back to our little planet here. And that is not inflation, that's deflationary at the end of the day. It also promotes globalization. The more money goes to corporations, the more they're going to want to reduce their costs. And so we've had a massive push for globalization and global profits. So it's been a 40-year cycle of this. And that could go on forever and it'd be wonderful, right? Except for one problem. There's human beings in the system. And human beings believe in some concepts that are actually not natural concepts, if you think about them. Justice, liberty, equality, an idea that when I look at you and you look at me, we have some commonality, and there should be some level of fairness, right? You can't just let us starve here in the streets while you create immense technological things. And so these two, and they're essentially the left and right there, populism versus free market economics, right? The story's old as time, right? Libertarianism versus communism, right? However you want to put it. But at the end of the day, natural selection in this thing it has a life of its own and eventually takes hold again. But along the way, people say it's not fair, and there has to be a rebalance that happens. This is not 100 years of history. This is 100,000 years of human history and goes on beyond that. So I know I started at the very beginning in a philosophy, but I think it's very important to understand this dynamic. And we just went too far. We went too far, right? And that's what always happens. It always goes too far. Somebody says, let them eat cake. And at some point, populism, rears its head. And populism started rearing its head about 8-9 years ago. You heard a lot of books written about inequality. People started talking about it globally. Populist leaders globally started to come more to power. Whether you like Donald Trump or Bernie Sanders, they both move left. They both are incredibly populist. One is talking to poor white people in West Virginia, and the other one's talking to poor urban people in Chicago, right? It is, but they're still the poor working class that has underperformed for 40 years that feels, and the young who feel that the system hasn't worked for them and it's not fair. And your mom may say to you, life isn't fair. That's fine. But at some point, you're only going to put up with it for so long. And so this populism built and built and built and built. Donald Trump brought the right left. The left went even more left. And then COVID happened. And that was the spark, right? And that spark led to $12 trillion of fiscal policy. That's a populist revolution by any other name. That's 10 times, an order of magnitude bigger in real terms than the New Deal. Adjusted for the size of the economy, it's about the same. But this is not the Great Depression. The New Deal plugged a decade-long hole called the Great Depression. And that response is not monetary policy. That money doesn't go to Planet Palo Alto. That money goes to people, has a velocity of 1. And not surprisingly, that's created inflation. It always does. Populism always creates inflation. That's a rebalancing to people. People are getting money. They haven't had money. What do they do with money? They spend it. They don't buy investments on the bottom. They buy goods. They go from eating less than enough to enough, or maybe just eating a little better, or spending a little bit more, right? And so that populist impulse is the key here to the macro view. Here we are. And once that populism starts, historically, it doesn't just stop. And the reason is populism leads to inflation, and inflation leads to more populism. At the end of the day, inflation is a flat tax. So all of a sudden, people thought they were doing better. Everybody was celebrating during COVID. Look at how much money I have in my bank. And then obviously, all of a sudden, everything in their bank got worth 10% less, right? Or whatever it is, right? And that makes people even more angry and more frustrated, right? The system is broken. It's not working for me. And that's true globally. So during times like that, you get more geopolitical stress. You get a unwind of globalization. You get you go from a collaboration game to a competition game broadly. People are scrambling for resources. And importantly, the more that starts, the more long-term expectations of inflation get rooted, the more people start moving forward, buying, inventories and, all kinds of demand. On top of that, if interest rates are now expected to be 6% for the next 2 years or whatever it is, right? You can't keep interest rates low, because at the end of the day, institutions will borrow at 3%, leverage everything that they can pin down and that they know is going to appreciate to 6%. And then they're going to push that. What does that do? That pushes inflation even higher. We've seen these cycles.